It was supposed to be the proudest moment of my life, my only son getting married. I had envisioned it since the day he was born, cradling him in my arms while rocking in the creaky nursery chair. I raised Daniel alone after his father died in a car crash when he was 5. I worked 2 jobs to keep the roof over our heads, skipped meals so he could eat, and took night shifts so I could attend his school recitals during the day. Every scar on my hands, every gray hair on my head carried the weight of sacrifice, but I never once regretted it, not until now. The wedding was 2 months away when Daniel invited me to lunch. He said it was important, and I naively assumed it was something sentimental. Maybe a letter, maybe a toast. I wore my favorite navy blue cardigan, the one he gifted me on Mother's Day years ago. But what came out of his mouth that afternoon tore through me more viciously than any wound life had ever left. "Mom," he began, fidgeting with his silver watch, "I need to ask you not to walk me down the aisle." I blinked. "But I thought we agreed. Since your dad is gone?" "I know," he interrupted coldly, "but it's not about that. Look, you're not photogenic. You're not exactly—" He hesitated, then whispered, "You're too ugly for the wedding photos." My heart dropped. Ugly. He said it with no flinch. Just like that. As if all those nights I stood outside his football practice waiting in the rain meant nothing. As if the countless hours I spent sewing patches on his school pants, hosting bake sales to help fund his class trips, meant absolutely nothing. I wasn't a mother. I was an eyesore. He saw my silence and rolled his eyes. "Please don't get dramatic," he muttered. "It's going to be a high-profile wedding. Alina's family is coming from overseas. There's press. It's not personal. It's aesthetic. Not personal. My son, the boy I gave everything to, was now ashamed of how I looked. Not of my behavior, not of anything I had done, just my face." I nodded. "Of course," I said quietly. "Wouldn't want to embarrass you." When I returned home that night, I locked the door, unplugged the phone, and cried until my face ached. But as the tears dried, something sharper than pain began to simmer in my chest. Clarity. I hadn't raised a monster overnight. This didn't happen in a vacuum. It was years of entitlement I'd fed with my own hands. And I knew one thing for certain. I may not be in the photos, but I would have the final say in what they remembered from that day. Because Daniel had forgotten one detail. The prenup? It wasn't written by a lawyer. It was written by me. And I had made sure the real version stayed unsigned, in a drawer. The one Alina never saw. Not yet. The days leading up to the wedding were strangely quiet, like the stillness before a hurricane. Daniel barely texted. When he did, it was short, transactional. "Don't forget the seating chart." "You'll still attend the ceremony, right?" There was no apology, no regret. As if telling your mother she was too ugly for your wedding was a reasonable thing to do. As if my presence had always been conditional on how well I'd aged. I played my part in silence, answering when spoken to, keeping my voice soft and even. But beneath the surface, I was building something far more intricate than a seating chart. I was crafting the exact moment when everything Daniel thought he controlled would unravel. Let me take you back 5 months before the wedding, when Alina's parents visited from Europe for the engagement celebration. They were old money, the kind of people who wore wealth like a perfume, subtle but suffocating. Alina's father, Mr. Gregor Andre, made it very clear he would only allow the wedding if his daughter's assets remained protected. I had nodded politely as they discussed the prenup over champagne in our living room, acting like a clueless widow with nothing to contribute. In reality, I offered to help draft a sample. Gregor accepted, amused by the idea of the American mother-in-law playing lawyer. What he didn't know was that I'd once worked as a legal secretary in a firm that handled high-profile divorces. I had seen more dirty contracts and ironclad clauses than most junior attorneys. And what I drafted wasn't just a prenup. It was a blueprint for poetic justice. The fake version, signed and sealed by Alina and Daniel, was squeaky clean. but the original I tucked away was different. It contained an infidelity clause, a financial transparency clause, and a clause giving Alina full control of Daniel's joint assets should he ever deceive her financially or emotionally, something I knew, deep in my gut, would happen. You see, Daniel had a habit of gambling, not cards, not casinos, cryptocurrency. He once lost $38,000 in 2 days, then begged me to wire him my savings to cover the tax penalties. I did, foolishly, thinking it would teach him responsibility. Instead, it taught him that no matter how far he fell, I would always pick up the pieces. Not this time. The night before the wedding, I went to Alina's hotel suite under the pretense of giving her a small heirloom, a brooch, silver and sapphire, that once belonged to my mother. But tucked inside the box was something else, the real prenup. When Alina opened it, her brows furrowed. She read it silently, her breath catching when she reached the 3rd page. Her fingers trembled. I watched her eyes widen as the realization sank in. "This isn't the version I signed," she whispered. "No," I replied calmly. "This is the version Daniel and I wrote before you were ever involved. It outlines what happens if you're betrayed. Financially, emotionally, publicly." She looked up at me, stunned. Why would he agree to this? He didn't know it still existed. I stood to leave, but paused in the doorway. "Oh," I said casually, "check the date on that bachelor party invoice he submitted to the wedding planner. He claimed it was a business retreat, but it was hosted at a strip club in Vegas. You'll find the receipt on page 5. Her jaw tightened. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in months, because the next morning wasn't just Daniel's wedding day. It was the day Alina would decide whether to marry a man who mocked his mother's face, or walk away with every cent he thought he was hiding. And I would be there, quietly seated in the back row, no camera flash on me, no spotlight. But when the music stopped and the bride didn't walk down the aisle, everyone would turn, not to me, but to Daniel, and he would finally understand the cost of turning beauty into shame. The chapel was decked out in ivory roses and soft candlelight, every detail polished to perfection, except for the one thing that mattered most, the bride. Guests murmured nervously, checking their watches, whispering about traffic, dress malfunctions, even cold feet. Daniel stood at the altar, trying to maintain his smirk of control, but I could see it cracking. His hands twitched at his sides. His eyes darted to the chapel doors. The music looped awkwardly for the 3rd time. Still, no sign of Alina. Then the wedding planner tiptoed up the aisle, whispered something in Daniel's ear, and everything collapsed. His face turned white. He staggered backward slightly, eyes wide as if the pews had vanished around him. People began asking questions. Alina's father stormed forward, demanding answers. The pianist stopped playing. A still silence fell over the room. I sat quietly in the back row, wearing a navy blue dress and the same brooch I'd gifted Alina. Only this one was real. The one in the box? A decoy. But the paper tucked inside it had been the truth. A truth Alina clearly believed, because she didn't just cancel the ceremony. She sent the video. A screen near the altar flickered on, and suddenly, every single person in that room was watching a calm, poised Alina standing in her hotel room, holding the original prenup. "This is not how I imagined today would go," she said softly. "But sometimes, a woman must choose peace over a performance. Daniel, I loved you. But love without respect is self-destruction. And I refuse to self-destruct for a man who hides lies under champagne flutes and wedding speeches." She held up the receipt from the Vegas bachelor party. "To those wondering why I'm not there, ask the man who took a private jet to a strip club 3 nights ago and paid for it with money meant for his mother's surgery." Gasps echoed through the chapel. I saw Daniel's head jerk toward me. He knew. He knew, but it was too late. Alina continued, her voice unwavering. To Daniel's mother, "Thank you for your honesty. Thank you for your strength. And thank you for showing me how to walk away, gracefully, but loudly." The screen faded to black. And in that chapel, the silence that followed was not holy. It was haunted. Daniel ran out without a word. Gregor Andre turned and told his assistant to freeze the accounts. Alina's mother was crying. Guests began collecting their things like survivors of an emotional earthquake. I stood, picked up my clutch, walked out the side door before anyone could stop me. 3 days later, Daniel came knocking at my apartment, furious, desperate, broke. "You ruined everything," he spat. "No," I said quietly. "You did. I'm your son." "You're the boy who told his mother she was too ugly to stand beside him. You're the man who used her cancer fund to pay for tequila and strippers. You're not someone I recognize anymore." He collapsed onto my porch steps. "Where am I supposed to go now?" I handed him a single folded paper. An official eviction notice from one of the properties I owned that he'd been secretly living in under my name. He hadn't even realized I owned it, but I did. In fact, I owned 4 of the 5 buildings he rotated between, rented in aliases, leased by his friends, hidden from tax records. I had spent the last 3 months quietly transferring all the titles back into my trust and preparing the legal notices. "You can start by respecting the woman who gave you everything," I said, "because now she's giving you nothing." He stood slowly, eyes red, jaw clenched, but said nothing. He didn't apologize. He didn't beg. But he left. And as I closed the door behind him, I didn't feel broken. I felt free. 2 weeks later, I took my own trip. Not a honeymoon, not exactly, but something sweeter. A solo journey through the Amalfi Coast where I ate lemon gelato, danced barefoot on warm tile floors, and watched sunsets with the kind of peace only a woman with no more secrets can feel. I sent 1 postcard, no return address. Just 6 words. "Beauty isn't skin deep, but revenge is."